Charles, we're here.
Einar, we're here again.
Hey, assassinations are becoming a regular tool of international diplomacy, is it now? Is this assassination diplomacy?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of assassinations in the past as well. The assassination of top Iranian scientists, assassination of some of the military leaders from the Iranian government.
But now, I mean, Shinzo Abe apart, that does not appear to be orchestrated by any government, but Daria Dugin, prominent right-wing firebrand, assassinated, and now you're just saying the woman who was accused of assassinating her has been assassinated.
The Ukrainian woman who was identified by the Russian government as the assassin of Daria Dugin. There's been some press reports that her body was found.
Well, that's the old, cutout. Let's see, I assign somebody to kill somebody, and then to hide it, I kill them.
That's right.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not just him. I mean, you had the Ayman al-Zawahiri in
Kabul.
In Kabul.
Yeah.
Pinpoint targeting. He was sitting out on a balcony, and they literally took him out without taking anybody else out. This is supposedly a sovereign country. Now, Afghanistan is asking Pakistan to stop letting U.S. drones, which fired these missiles, to cross into their area. I mean, this is yes, it's happened in the past. We know Lande and all these guys were assassinated in South America by the U.S.
But now the technical tools are so far more advanced than what it used to be. And precision assassinations.
But I mean, what kind of world are we talking about where the U.S. on one side says the rule of law, international diplomacy, and then at the other side they're okaying, predator drones to take out individuals that they don't like. And this isn't the only one. I mean, Iran, they took out the prominent scientists, but also the general when he was on another country's sovereign soil.
In Iraq, I think.
Yeah. So is the pattern now that any country that wants to will just literally decapitate, as an example to others, people they don't like?
I think it's really basically just being done by the United States. I don't see many other cases.
There have been cases in Israel. Israel intelligence has been accused for a long time of orchestrating Mossad. There's also, Iran has been accused. Russia has been accused. So I'm just saying that without going into the details of every country that's involved, it seems to be growing. That state-sponsored assassination, which is against the Geneva Protocols,
that's right,
is now de facto part of the tools of diplomacy.
Part of the tools of some countries.
But if one country's doing it,
others will be forced to do it in response. That's really unfortunate, because what we have is a situation in which the technology for this is getting really advanced with satellite pinpointing, with drones, with precision missiles.
Well, right now, I mean, I can go out and buy a cheap drone, strap some C4 onto it.
That's right.
And I can fly it anywhere. I mean, it seems that because of the technological change, it is now doable. Imagine, I mean, over 100 times they try to assassinate, or 800 times they try to assassinate Castro.
That's right.
Poisoned milkshakes and things like this, poisoned cigars. And now with drones, I can only imagine.
Instantaneous.
Very, very hard to do it. And then, of course, there was Salman Rushdie, although there's no evidence that it was state-sponsored, but still, this idea of taking...
What the Turks say, there are very concrete evidence. But,
well, we'll have to see what comes out of it. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, has indicated China could play a larger role in solving the food insecurity crisis by distributing wheat it has stockpiled to other countries. You had a brilliant quote a few weeks ago saying, if China is the villain, why is it responsible for the incompetency of other governments?
Yeah, I think China has released some wheat to developing countries, but it's simply absurd for developed countries, wealthy nations, to call on China, which is still a developing country, to, hey, take the food out of the mouth of your people because we couldn't do our job right.
Yeah, but I mean, the U.S. is going to be a main exporter. They've had some rough patches with the weather and things like that due to climate change. But the U.S. stands to benefit from these very high prices. China is a net importer.
That's right.
So why is the UN ambassador from the U.S. to the United Nations trying to put the heat on China as if it's China's fault that they're going to make money in the U.S.?
Speaking of which, I saw a note from United Press International, I think it was interesting. UPI, that despite the sanctions against Russia and Europeans suffering like crazy over it, over 3,000 ships of Russian goods have went to the U.S., including over 100 shiploads of phosphates,
yeah. The
fertilizers.
Well, it's not only that. I mean, in South America, some countries are reporting 20% increase year on year trade with Russia.
And everybody else has to abide by sanctions. But we, America, we want to buy from Russia. We continue to buy from Russia.
Well, it's not only that, but I mean, it's okay it's all understandable when India is buying S-400 missile systems and buying oil. There's some complaints.
Yeah.
But in the end, they say, well, we can understand. But somehow China's the villain because it is simply holding the line. It is just trading normally things. Yes, buying more oil because it's cheaper. Buying gas when they can. It all depends on pipelines. But I mean, there's this dual standard, this kind of hypocrisy that if we like you, it's okay. If we don't like you, it's not okay. You saw that in the Summit of the Americas, where inviting everybody meant just inviting the people
that we want to invite. That we want to invite. But in terms of this food stuff, given the climate change and the war, I think food is going to become an ever bigger issue the next couple of years. But tied immediately into that, into food supply, is social unrest. And it's the developing countries which will suffer.
It's not just developing. The developed countries, Germany is expecting a very, very low crop, because of natural disasters, but also because of the limited access to phosphate fertilizers and things like this. So, China is, the way I read it, Europe is going to get poor, but developing nations are the ones who are actually going to go hungry.
That's right. By the hundreds of millions, unfortunately.
Going to Taiwan has become a political pilgrimage. You've had Marsha Blackburn, U.S. Senator, lands in Taiwan vowing not to be bullied by China. Okay, let's see. The U.S. is divided, right? You have a former president who's under indictment for taking records. And this isn't, he did take the records.
That's right.
The question is how serious it is. You have people completely polarized over guns and abortion.
That's right.
You have the poverty rate has risen in the U.S.
That's right.
And remained elevated.
Every month it's increasing. 1%
increase in the number of children, I think. So it's over 14.5%. All right. Down from 14.7%. Poverty line. And this comes from out of Columbia University. They have a poverty research center. I mean, how can you talk about going to Taiwan and standing up when, there's a war going on in Ukraine, your people are suffering at home? What will going to Taiwan do to help child poverty? to help heal a nation that is divided, to deal with all of the issues that they have.
This is a show of U.S. politicians, as you will know. U.S. politicians, photo ops, and then get your name into the press, hit any subject which is hot, so that you can have, as you say, photo ops. But it's absolutely absurd because you got so many domestic issues, as you said, that have to be addressed. But this is further provocation against China again. It's to cause trouble in Asia.
I know, but to what goal?
Short-term goal, photo ops.
I know,
get into the press.
But long term, to go to another country that that your country has acknowledged as part of another country and say, right. I'm not afraid of you. I'm standing, up for Ukraine. It's incongruous. This brings up the issue. Does Biden have an end game?
I don't think anybody in the U.S. has an end game, not only for the Taiwan issue.
Political transactionalism.
Yeah.
Just I'll do whatever is necessary to remain in power.
That's right, short term. Do you see an end game for them?
No, that's why I'm kind of wondering. You look at so much of this, whether it's Japan or Taiwan or South Korea, there's no cohesion. ASEAN, Africa, South America, Middle East, Central Asia. Where does the U.S. have a policy that's clearly enunciated other than get China, choose between us? Let's set up a false dichotomy, saying that you're either with us or against us, and there's no in between.
That's right. You described it as get China, right?
Yeah.
It's even worse than that. Is get China, and we will also benefit from our allies.
But they're undercutting their allies.
Exactly.
Taiwan, they're going to take away and Taiwan, South Korea,
That's
Japan,
exactly what I mean.
Undercutting their
benefiting from our allies.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Koreans, for example, tens of billions of dollars invested in fabs in China.
Yeah. Where are they going?
Tens of billions. Oh, are we going to transfer all of our facilities to Arizona and Texas?
And then not be able to sell them to China,
Exactly.
which is their largest market.
Exactly.
So this is the point. Where is this all going? You're undercutting your own markets. You're undercutting your allies.
Yeah.
You're saying that you're reshoring things, but that's at the expense of everyone else. At what time does this run out?
I think it's beginning to run out. I don't think the Koreans are going to join the chip thing as the U.S. wants.
Well, it seems that a lot of I can see South Korea joining just simply to give.
That's right.
Mouth support.
That's right.
But not actually,
How can they go to the U.S., number one, without engineers to build the fabs? How can they build the fabs and without engineers and scientists to operate, technicians?
Well, maybe they're going to airlift Koreans and
over.
Chinese. Oh, wait a second. We don't trust them. Remember, no. But this is the funny thing about it. That moment that they convinced all these senators to go along with this reshoring program, $70+ billion, was when they said, they showed a picture of the chips being manufactured and packaged where? In Taiwan.
In Taiwan. Yeah.
And that's when they decided to vote for this, because they said Taiwan's insecure, it's part of China, we got to get it back here. So there is no trust in Taiwan. And yet Tsai Ing-wen continues to say, oh, America, they're backing us.
Yeah, the other part about this, I think, is really quite funny, because I was speaking to a number of Koreans who are in the business, and they said, if we moved some facilities to the U.S., we're basically killing our own bottom line, because we cannot produce in the U.S. to be competitive anywhere in the world, including Europe.
So they can remove facilities that are sufficient to supply the U.S. market.
Yes.
And that's about it. And they don't even have the lion's share of the U.S. market. They have DRAM, the memory chips.
Only.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other part about that is DRAM or any processor will have to be shipped elsewhere, probably to Asia, to be put into end products.
I know, but that's the disconnect. This is where all the wheels fall off this train that's going. You don't have the ability to make the things that'll be used in the processor. Processors. You'll probably restrict these processors from being used anywhere like China, or any other Southeast Asian nation. But those are the only places that you can actually make them.
Yeah.
And your processors will be more expensive. So here I am. I can choose between U.S. processors and pay a premium for them.
That's right.
Okay. Or I can buy cheaper processors that are made
from
in
Asia.
Taiwan, China, Asia, etc. So it just doesn't. The only market there will be is if the U.S. continues to erect economic walls and in essence say, you can't sell anything in the U.S. unless it has that chip. Now, they've already done that with EVs.
Electric vehicles,
yeah,
right.
Unless it has a certain amount of content for the battery and the car, it cannot be, it can be sold, but it doesn't get the $7,500 US subsidy.
There is I'm trying to remember the name of the law that Jones Act, is it?
Yeah.
On shipbuilding in the U.S.
Oh, I don't know. I'll check that out and we'll put that in.
1930. In 1930, there was a legislation passed in the U.S. that said any port that was doing shipping in the U.S. that is transnational, that crosses borders, has to have ships that's owned over 75% in the U.S. and built in the U.S. And U.S. Navy is supposed to have ships that's only made in the U.S. completely. So the end result, after nearly 100 years, is that U.S. made ships are 400% higher cost than Korean-made ships. And the shipyards basically just gone kaput.
Yeah. Well, no one's buying or building them. You can't afford to do that. I mean,
you can't do that in the U.S.
No.
So now,
but why haven't they learned from the past?
They haven't.
It doesn't work then. Why do they think it's going to work now? I don't know.
Short-termism.
Yeah. Along that line, U.S. moves to suspend Chinese flights to the U.S. And I found this really interesting. So China suspended 26 passenger flights coming in from the U.S. because the people on these flights were bringing COVID into China.
They didn't have to be tested.
Because they didn't have to be tested, but when they got here, they tested them, and then they had to be quarantined here in China. And there's the risk of contagion, of course, when they come in. And they said, listen, we have to protect ourselves. Right? We have a zero COVID policy, and they're doing their best to try to change that in terms of going it, but they can't afford to allow a whole bunch of people with COVID into the country to undo everything that they've done so far.
That's right.
And the U.S. response is, oh, you got 26 of our flights can't go there? Okay, 26 of your flights can. Am I wrong? Is this the kind of stuff that I expect on a playground? I have a good reason to doing this, but I'm going to respond in an irrational way because I have to do tit for tat?
There doesn't seem to be any sense from the U.S. side to want to negotiate or work things out with China. In every sphere, in every sector, including these visits by politicians. Okay,
well, let's talk about the hypocrisy here. So that you have on one hand, 26 flights. Then on the other hand, Grand Slam title winner Novak Djokovic will not be allowed to play in the U.S. Open because he's been unvaccinated. Right. But meanwhile, returning U.S. citizens are allowed to enter the U.S. without vaccinations. There's no check. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what it means.
But that's for returning U.S. citizens.
I know.
And U.S. citizens
I thought it was a health issue. I didn't think it was about a nationality issue. That was a health issue.
But all of this is a promotion of U.S. exceptionalism.
U.S. citizens exceptional. You either have the virus or you don't have the virus.
That's right.
It doesn't matter how exceptional.
That's right. This is promoting U.S. exceptionalism, promoting We're self-centered. We're number one.
Is it complete chaos?
It's completely.
Yeah. Talking about chaos.
But aside from going further on the, well, let's put it this way, okay? This is the type of stuff that the U.S. politicians use to make Americans feel that they're king of the hill, they're top of the world, they're more important than anybody else.
Yeah,
but it's irrational.
But it isn't working. America is more divided now than it's been in, in many, many, many years.
Yeah.
Talking about disasters, let's talk a little bit of Great Britain. This is just to face inflation and inter-party political wrangling. Truss, who apparently is in the front seat to become the new PM in September, she's threatened to invoke Article 16, which would in essence say that this is unworkable and we are going to change it. But that unilateral change can mean that the EU can do it. But it has a further consequence, in that there was the Good Friday Agreement, which is the basis of the end of the hostilities between Northern Ireland and within Northern Ireland with the IRA, Irish Republican Army.
Right.
This puts that agreement in jeopardy. And there's already been calls from both Ireland and Northern Ireland saying, do not put this in jeopardy.
Don't play with this.
Don't play with this.
That's right.
This is the basis of peace.
That's right.
So she's going to undo that and cast what is already the most uncertain future of a country in Great Britain, other than perhaps Ukraine.
And also throw the whole EU agreement.
Yes, the EU agreement basically says, well, you renegotiated, we'll renegotiate.
That's right.
And I don't see Europe being in a position to give up anything to Great Britain at a time when EU citizens are feeling the pinch. So where is Great Britain going? I cannot see a happy future here.
Over 10% inflation.
They're forecasting 18% in the winter. And where are the solutions? She's proposing a 5% cut in VAT. Let's add more debt.
Add more debt, add more inflation.
But what I don't understand is that the conservatives are supposed to be the level-minded business,
conservative.
Yes, conservative. We don't add debt. We make money. It's personal responsibility, and that seems to be all out the window. As with many other democracies, as people feel the pinch, they look to their leaders to give them things.
And the leaders give them nothing, like in Germany. Sanctions against Russian gas doesn't mean that no electricity, doesn't mean that the economy would tank, doesn't matter. Continue.
But the thing is, angry middle-class voters are eventually going to come to the polls, and at that point they're going to express themselves. So I can see a lot of the current incumbent governments falling over this kind of general dissatisfaction with the thing is they didn't control what happened in Ukraine, and now they expect their own citizens to suffer.
What's really, in this context, in terms of Europe especially, if we look back at what happened in the 1930s, you can also have another faction of the society moving toward fascism through populism.
Well, you are starting to see a resurgence of right-wing parties in France, Germany, other places.
Marine Le Pen.
It seems that we are sleepwalking back into a combination of what happened in World War I, where they have these alliances building up and creating a problem, and then World War II, where you had economic situation out of control, and fascist leaders showed up and said, I can handle this. The problem is we need a more united nationalistic government. It's those people's fault. Anti-Semitism, and not only Jews.
Racism in general.
Poles, gypsies, etc. It was always the others that are out there. So I'm just trying to get my head. Korea signs a $2.25 billion deal to do a joint Russian nuclear program. And yet, I haven't heard boo out of the State Department. I mean, this is for Egypt's first nuclear power plant. I don't hear anything coming from the U.S. Are they concerned about the Chip 4 alliance or what?
No, I think the U.S. Is still importing Russian uranium.
Yes, well, where else are they going to get it?
Where else are they going to get it?
I think Australia has uranium, so they can probably get it from there. But still.
Hasn't yet, because they need it now.
They need it
right?
now. Yeah, but that's different.
That's different because
our needs.
That's right.
Yes.
America.
Yes. Everyone else.
But I think it's a much bigger issue here. When you have 28,000 troops, American troops on your soil, you would assume Korea, as they put the THAAD system in a couple of years ago, against strong Chinese objections. Yep. What we see now is Korea doing this deal with the Russians. That's number one. Number two, resisting U.S. pressure on the chips. Even very close allies, quote unquote, of the U.S. are taking more independent route.
Well, look at Mexico.
That's right, Mexico. Yeah. So, or even Colombia. Yeah. Right.
Well, you have that pink tide that's kind of happening there, but it seems to go from, it's a pendulum. It seems to go to one direction, then the other direction very quickly.
In South America, yes. But I think in Asia, except the Japanese, the ASEAN countries is very clear.
Yeah, very stable.
Very stable in terms of let's do business with China and let's all make money and let's all improve our lives.
Yeah. Well, they're balancing the great power relationship.
Yeah. But in a way which is much more neutral than they used to be. Yeah. I remember the days when Vietnam and the Philippines and so on were strongly in the U.S. camp. Yeah. Strongly in the U.S. camp. Something happened that the ambassador of the Philippines in Washington at some conference talked about firmly standing on the side of the U.S. and Taiwan should anything happen. And he was scolded by President Marcos.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't set foreign policy.
That's right.
Yeah. And there's a new sheriff in town.
That's right. And President Marcos immediately, in a meeting, announced that one China policy for us is sacrosanct. Yeah. So all these things show even Korea, in addition to the ASEAN countries, are adopting, I think, a more appropriate, rational, independent view on where their interests lie, rather than just blindly following the U.S., which is a good thing.
Social media. During a 3-hour interview, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg had a meltdown. He says the FBI intelligence officials told him to limit the reach of the Hunter Biden political scandal, which has, if you unpack it, has a lot of aspects to it, since he insisted for years that, no, we don't do that.
That's right.
We've never done that.
That's right.
And now caught red-handed. It's going to have implications for his loss. I mean, he's contacted his lawyers now, and I don't know how it leaked, but he's apparently very worried about this.
Well, he should be.
Well, there's going to be shareholder lawsuits. I mean, there's going to be a drop in the price.
Oh, share prices already has been tanking.
Yeah, so it just, I guess the truth at some point comes out, but I can't imagine. You look at these tech titans, right? Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, and et cetera. Are these the people we really want?
Who controlling
so much of what people think and what information they have access to?
That's right. Yeah. And then also what information, as you said, have access to. Of some friends of mine who are in the internet business in China told me, in terms of Chinese social media, some of the more outrageous things are being promoted with IP address in the US.
Like what?
Like during the Shanghai problems. You know, people talking about, oh, how horrendous it is, how our lives...
Yeah, but that was a whole bunch of bots that were being used.
That's right.
Yeah, fake...
fake news, fake social media.
Social media. Haven't quite figured out who was behind it, but
Exactly.
It was very, very organized.
Very well organized, and the IP address were from the US. I wonder.
Can't imagine that the CIA was involved in that. They would never do that. Oh, wait a second.
They just told Zuckerberg.
They just revealed they did. But I mean, if we didn't have Snowden,
we wouldn't know.
And the WikiLeaks and
Yeah,
all the rest of
that's
it.
right.
I mean, the things. There is some good news. China and the U.S. look like they're reaching an audit deal, which is going to save, what, a couple thousand U.S.-listed Chinese companies from having to delist from the U.S. stock markets?
Ultimately, no matter how you jump on China, complain and bitch and talk about this, ultimately, Wall Street is Wall Street. They need to have products.
Yeah, but I mean, this is under the Biden administration.
Yeah.
I was quite shocked. I thought they were going to try to, do...
Oh, you're right. It would be the Republicans who will be in favor of this.
Yeah, but they're nowhere to be seen. Their fingerprints aren't on this. I mean, it's being done within the administration. I haven't heard any blowback from it.
Okay. You are of an age that you will remember the old days, as I do.
Don't remind me.
Yeah. I think there is a view, I don't know how valid it is, that in the old days, in the 1970s and even 1960s, it was the unions that backed the Democratic Party that was able to get the votes out and win over Republicans. And the Republicans were old WASP
White
companies,
Anglo-Saxon
big
Protestants,
companies,
yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
But eventually the unions were pretty much neutered, exactly. That's a nice way to put it. And as a result, the unions had no longer the power to support Democrats, and Democrats eventually became backed by Wall Street.
Yeah, it's amazing how they switched. I mean, the Republicans used to back Planned Parenthood,
right,
as responsible population
That's
and family
right.
control.
That's right.
Now they completely switched.
That's right.
Now you're starting to see disaffected lower white middle class supporting Republicans, whereas you said they used to support. But it's not only true in the U.S. You see this kind of involution happening in places like Great Britain, where now there's a bunch of swing voters of lower income, mostly white swing voters who are voting for conservatives. Yeah. When traditionally they'd always swung with Labor. And
traditionally it was the conservatives that killed the coal miners.
But I mean, this, if I talk to my friends who are very firmly in favor of democracy, say, "Oh, this is the system working." I really don't see it that way, because it's not improving anything. The last 40 years have been basically moving sideways, decline, in relative terms.
Actually, what I would say is that this is a reflection of vested interest behind the politicians.
Well, obviously, special interests almost everywhere. I mean, all of your industries are dominated by, your major industries are dominated by 2 or 3 players.
That's right.
And there seems to be no interest. I mean, occasionally you hear about tech, Twitter, all these groups, say, oh, there's got to be an antitrust investigation. But it tends not to really have any teeth. We don't see anything really happening. You still have big banks who are dominating everything, too big to fail. Nothing has changed since 2008 and 9, the financial crisis.
In terms of banks, one clear example is how the technology, for example, which is now in China, that is totally prevalent, WeChat Pay, Alipay, and so on and so forth, that make things much more efficient and lower cost to both the consumer and the businessman, refused to be adopted in the US because of the banking lobby. Why? Because credit cards, they charge a lot of fees. And check cashing, you can charge a lot of fees as well.
Well, it's not only that, but they're preying on the people.
The poor people.
The poor people, especially the migrants who are trying to send money back to their relatives in other places. They're charged huge fees. People
More than
who don't
10%.
make it, more than 10%.
Yeah.
Talking about, the intellectual side of things. For the first time, China now has, out of the top 5 cities in terms of world, in terms of scientists, leading scientists, Beijing and Shanghai are number 1 and 2. And it's followed by...
Beijing, Shanghai, New York, London, and Boston.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this would have been unthinkable if you had said this 10 years ago.
That's right.
And now it's the reality. So given that we're moving towards tertiary industries, where IP is, in many respects, more valuable than even hard assets.
That's right.
How is the U.S. winning this war? Or this contest? I shouldn't say war.
As we joke about before, right? Chinese engineers are into engineering. U.S. engineers are into financial engineering.
I always love that quote.
No, there's another interesting aspect here. Beijing and Shanghai are tops, but take a look at the city like Shenzhen, which is less involved in deep science or hard science, but more in manufacturing and applied science. Even Shenzhen, on average day, 120 new patents are granted per day.
China has surpassed the U.S. in terms of the
right.
number of patents. The old way of discussing that from people in the U.S. is, it's about quality over quantity. But, I asked somebody, said, well, if it's about quality over quantity, then why is China getting ahead of the U.S. on a lot of different areas? The U.S. is still strong.
Sure.
And I'm not saying that China is perfect, but I'm just saying this idea that, Chinese, they're not top tier. They can't develop the next new thing.
They only copy.
That's gone.
That's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other part is that if you don't have the manufacturing capacity or the supply chain, it's very difficult to put your scientific results into real life. That's why I think, the joke is Facebook is now called Meta, Metaverse, going into the dream world.
Well, it was about a year ago that this all started out, and it looks like it remains to be a dream of a new world.
That's right.
Yeah. Tangential to that, I mean, it's come out quite clearly that the Brits, it reminds me of the Brits had okayed Huawei's equipment. And they had gone over it very thoroughly, and assuming that the British know their intelligence, and they have no reason to say, oh yeah, it's good if it's going to be a threat. And then apparently there was a meeting between the cabinet officials and the security officials where the U.S. side pounded the table, either for us or against us.
Yeah.
I mean, is this it? If you can't win the intellectual war, you simply keep out new ideas. Are we going back to the Dark Ages?
If you can't win on facts, then you use laws of the jungle by pounding the table and pushing others. That's what the U.S. is doing now. But it's a sign of desperation, I think.
It is, but I mean, this is why I question the Dark Ages ideas, because there is no end game.
That's right.
There's no end game in which the U.S. is able to reshore things, keep prices low, and keep their economy ahead by doing what they're doing. It would seem more logical to sit down with not only China, with Europe, Russia, things, and start talking about how to make the pie bigger instead of how to make my share of a declining pie bigger. And that's really what I see here. Intellectual correctness. Stephen Roach, Yale professor, former chairman of Morgan Stanley, I think you know him,
Yes, I know.
Recently published
very
a
well.
Project Syndicate article critical of Beijing's current economic policies. Notable was that the fact that he discussed only financial issues without acknowledging the need for people-centered social gains. I was astounded. I generally am very interested in his writing. Mm-hmm. He's a very thoughtful person. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he has a lot of experience. Mm-hmm. In the past, he's been fairly middle of the road mm-hmm. in both his criticisms and praises of China. Mm-hmm. But, you know, this represented too much of a sharp turn. And I wonder if, in fact, as a senior political researcher and fellow at Taihe Institute, Ding Yifan, who we interviewed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you interviewed mm-hmm. at length last week. They see this as a political correctness, a litmus test that is sweeping through American intellectual circles.
It is. It's very unfortunate, but I have the same feeling, because if you look at what is in the press today, including commentaries in the major newspapers and publications, it's becoming a litmus test.
It's all in alignment, but not clear where it's going. And
nowhere, to what end?
To what end?
Exactly.
And this is why I was surprised by his article, because there's no end game. He was critical and he said, well, China's gone overboard on trying to address its past faults. There was too much focus on investment-led mm-hmm. Development and mm-hmm. things like this. But there was a resounding silence when it came to, if you think what China's doing wrong, what would you suggest it do instead? And ignoring this, didn't mention poverty, reduction, didn't mention the increases in access to Social Security, mm-hmm. to social benefits, mm-hmm. to an increased level of societal.
That's right. Taking 90% of the people from being illiterate to becoming literate.
But I mean, he's a smart guy.
But he's from Wall Street.
Yeah,
right?
But I mean,
Morgan Stanley.
Isn't that the fault of Wall Street, that they consider their numbers above people?
I think that is the basic premise of Wall Street. They don't take into account social benefits of issues. Just like we were joking about ESG, environment, social responsibility, and governance. What is ESG now? It's a business.
Greenwashing.
It's a business.
But I mean, it's a business that's going to kill us.
Yeah,
because
that's
it's
right.
not addressing the problem. It's just
enhancing.
Enhancing profits.
It's aiming at profits. It's aiming at consulting firms, accounting firms, and law firms. Getting paid to greenwash.
How is this going to help global warming? It really. Let's talk about something positive. China rallied around its hero firefighters.
Yes.
Mountain fires in several regions of southwest China around Chongqing were extinguished. Over 1,000 firefighters from different regions around China participated. And the pictures are amazing of people actually taking their own motorbikes and mopeds and driving the firefighters up the mountain.
That's right.
Giving them water, giving them food, supporting them. And then when they're leaving, a hero's send-off. Throngs of people, tens of thousands of people doing it. I mean, somebody said, finally China has come together. I think that's nonsense. They did the same thing during the earthquake.
Yeah, absolutely. What is different this time? What is different, and I think very significant, is social media, where the average Joe can use his cell phone and then record many of these events.
Well, it practically broke the internet. I mean, here
That's
in China,
right.
I mean, people
Fantastic.
use their social media to show
Their
all
support.
These people. And these are ordinary people. I mean, you saw guys in T-shirts who were, obviously just trying to help. And,
That's right.
But, you contrast that those images and that feeling with what you see in the U.S., daily killings,
That's right.
gun violence, no one coming together.
Even the police was running away from gun violence in
Yeah.
the case of schools, you know. It's
In Uvalde, Texas, yeah. I mean, they still haven't gotten to the bottom of why there were 200 armed police in a standoff with one person while he was systematically shooting children.
kids, yeah.
Yeah. But it just seems strange. I mean, and yet China is vilified as somehow Chinese people are disaffected, and they feel put upon, and they live in a police state. They certainly don't act it.
I think there's a cultural aspect here too. One is individualism, and exemplified by the U.S. But in China, it's always about the family, the household, the society. Then you go to the next level, your village, your city, your province, your society as a whole, and your country as a whole. And it's sometimes, I think in most instances in China, what is best for society is accepted as something that should rise above your individual's wishes and desires.
You can't have a society unless there's give and take. There's no such thing as freedoms if you have to exist with other people and you have to have allowances. I can't go to my neighbor's house and take something I see I like.
That's right.
And
that's the
that
problem.
would be the freedom.
Exactly.
I like it, I take it. Right?
Yeah, that's the problem with individualism carried to the extreme. That's what we have now in much of the West, especially the U.S., unfortunately.
Well, that brings us to a close.
Okay.
But before we leave, there was something we were talking about earlier in terms of the what was it? It was what was the first things we were talking about before we went on set?
I can't remember.
Can't remember. That's our problem. We're getting old. We can remember a lot of things.
There was something.
You were talking to some friends in the United States on the street about technology. All right, we'll leave it for next time.